Citing Mary Douglas's classic study, Purity and Danger, Noel Carroll argues in The Philosophy of Horror that a monster is something that satisfies incompatible categories. Categories which, according to our conceptual schemes and ordinary reasoning and culture, should be exclusive. No thing could be both, and yet a monster is both. Easy examples include the category of being alive and being dead. Undead creatures are somehow both. Or the categories of animate and inanimate, which are occupied simultaneously by haunted objects. You've got the categories human and beast occupied simultaneously by lycanthropes, and the categories of innocent and malevolent being simultaneously occupied by evil clowns, evil dolls, evil children, and evil toys. One pair of such categories, however, often goes unnoticed, and those are the categories of me and not me, the self and the other. A monster that violates such categories would be something that seems to be oneself, but also is not oneself. Imagine an exact duplicate of you somehow showed up and tried to take your place. Or even many such duplicates. Such creatures are not you. They're copies, after all, not the original. And yet, qualitatively, in every discernible respect, they are you. Horror fiction associated with clones, cloning, and blurring the line between self and other are what we're going to draw upon today for our adventure. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to talk about the Ravenloft domain of dread called Dominia. This is an old domain of dread going back to the 2nd edition of Ravenloft, and in 5th edition it has been turned into an island in the Sea of Sorrows. As with all my Ravenloft videos, we're going to talk about what the domain is, list some media to help us get an imaginative grip on the place, and then sketch out an adventure. In this case, the adventure is a level 4 one-shot, or two-shot, which draws upon the Turn of Fortune's wheel and keys from the Golden Vault, specifically Prisoner 13. Before getting into all of that, though, what is the domain of Dominia? Well, the asylum of the vampire Dr. Daclaude Heinfroth rises upon this stormy island. The asylum's patients are all dramatically different versions of Heinfroth himself, inspired by who he was at various points during his lengthy life. Trapped on the island laboratory alone with nobody but copies of himself, Heinfroth not only studies his clones as patients, but enslaves them as labor and feeds on them as food. In this way, he is forever scrutinizing himself, beating himself, subjugating himself, and consuming himself. Okay. As I mentioned, Dominia is one of these domains of dread that goes back to the 2nd edition of Ravenloft. In that edition, it was kind of a Victorian madhouse domain. Many of its horrifying themes came from the abuses that were common in real-life sanitariums. And Dr. Heinfroth, also known pseudonymously as Dr. Dominiani, was described as a unique sort of vampire, one which not only looked like a werewolf and loved to eat garlic, but who fed on cerebral fluid and spinal fluid instead of blood. The 5th edition of Ravenloft, however, wisely downplays this idea of role-playing in an abusive sanitarium, and instead introduces an intriguing element of clones, cloning, and copying oneself. As described in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, Dominia is a domain which is one single laboratory run by a vampire who's in charge of his own clones, and nobody else lives there. It's fascinating, and to help get an imaginative grip on the idea, here are some bits of influential media. First, and most importantly, I must recommend the 2022 short story Shadow and Thirst by John Langan. It's from his anthology Corpsemouth and Other Autobiographies, and it concerns a vampire who discovers victims so seldomly that he employs a magical mirror to clone his victims over and over and over and feed on them. The adventure that we're going to sketch out today is highly influenced by this short story, and I really want to emphasize that this story helped me think about this domain of dread in particular and the kind of horror that it appears to be going for. In addition, I recommend the first few episodes of the 2019 HBO series Watchmen, specifically the scenes that concern Ozymandias. Ozymandias finds himself trapped on an estate in control of an innumerable supply of clones, and he ends up doing some horrifying things with them, things the likes of which I imagine Dr. Heinfroth does to his own clones. I also recommend the 1995 film The City of Lost Children, specifically for the island laboratory in which Kronk, the mad scientist, lives with 5 clones. Not only the subject, but the general aesthetic of the laboratory I think is worth drawing on for thinking about Dominia. And speaking of the aesthetics of a sanitarium laboratory, I also recommend the 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula, specifically for the scenes that take place in Dr. Seward's laboratory with Tom Waits. I really like the costume design, where the guards have cages over their heads, and I would highly recommend describing Dr. Heinfroth's guards as having that same sort of uniform. There's also the 2014 film Stonehurst Asylum, based on a dark comedy by Edgar Allan Poe, and its general design and aesthetics for a Victorian asylum are also worth thinking about and drawing upon. Our adventure is going to feature a floating head, that is, one that's been separated from its body, and for inspiration I would draw on the character Nasra from Fear and Hunger, that 2018 video game. Nasra is an intriguingly evil character. He makes for a delightful horror sidekick, and I would think of that character as an influence instead of thinking of Mort from Planescape Torment, as cool as that game is too, and as Mort is. And speaking of video games, there's also the 2008 game Fallout 3, which features Vault 108, a vault populated entirely by monstrously violent clones of a dude named Gary. I'm mentioning it because it does match the theme of this domain of dread, although everything else I think is a little bit of a stretch. And as a runner-up, I might also recommend the film Moon from 2009. I don't want to spoil this one, but trust me, it's on theme. Okay, with influential media out of the way, let's sketch out this adventure. It's an adventure for level 4 PCs, and it has basically 2 parts. In part 1, the PCs wake up in the laboratory in Dominia, already prisoners of Dr. Heinfroth. Fortunately for the PCs, however, they have an ally, an enchanted, decapitated, floating head, which once belonged to a clone of Dr. Heinfroth, who goes by the name of Mort and offers to help the PCs escape in exchange for some information that he needs. For this part of the adventure, we're going to run the mortuary from Turn of Fortune's Wheel, and once the PCs escape it, we turn to the second part of the adventure, where the PCs serve Mort by sneaking through the asylum and trying to find a specific clone of Dr. Heinfroth, one which is only known by the title Clone 13. Once the PCs find and free that clone, Mort will get the information he wants, and the PCs will be able to escape into the mists. And for this part of the adventure, we are of course going to use Prisoner 13 from Keys from the Golden Vault. So let's sketch this thing out in a bit more detail. In Act 1, PCs wake up on examining tables or operating tables in some kind of laboratory. They are greeted by a floating, bloody head that has a spinal cord dangling down from its neck. The floating head introduces itself as Mort and explains what's going on. The PCs are trapped in the laboratory of Dr. Heinfroth, a vampire who creates, commands, and even feeds upon an army of clones that staff the place, both as guards as well as patients. Mort explains that the PCs are in the basement of the laboratory, and that if the PCs want to escape, they need to go up from the basement onto the main floor, and then carefully sneak around until they can find a clone, a specific clone of Dr. Heinfroth, a clone called Clone 13. Mort promises to give more information as soon as they get upstairs, but for now the PC's task is clear. Get upstairs. Escape the lower level of the laboratory. Now, as I mentioned, for a map of this place, we're going to use the mortuary from Turn of Fortune's Wheel. We're going to keep everything the same, except that every single monster has exactly the same face. A bearded face with a full head of hair and pointed ears. A face that looks exactly like Mort's. This doesn't mean that the monsters are the same otherwise, however. You can have hulking, lumbering flesh golems that have Dr. Heinfroth's face, or lithe, sleek, dexterous monsters that have Heinfroth's face. Again, keep the statistics the same, just make them all clones of Heinfroth. As the PCs make their way to one of the exits, Mort discusses how everybody is a clone of the same person, and how, among the clones, only Dr. Heinfroth himself is a vampire, and a very powerful one at that. The PC should take care to avoid Heinfroth at all costs. Now, once the PCs exit the basement of the laboratory, Mort gives them some more information and details their mission. Mort says that he's interested in some arcane knowledge which only Clone 13 has. This includes knowledge of how to open a portal to the mists, a portal through which the PCs can escape from the laboratory. He adds that there's no other escape because the laboratory is an island on a windswept, storm-battered sea. Knowing that the PCs probably want to escape, that's Mort's bargain. The PCs will find and free Clone 13 for Mort, and Mort will make sure that a portal to the mists opens and that the PCs can escape. And here, as I said, I would run Prisoner 13 from Keys from the Golden Vault. Mort is going to take the place of the quest giver Varen, and the PCs will start in area R18. Just say that the stairwell there goes one floor down as well as going up. You should also ask the PCs how they're going to disguise themselves as guards. You might let there be some guard uniforms lying around, and you might have Mort help them out a bit. Maybe he has a hat of disguise stowed somewhere. Now, if you're wondering how will the PCs disguise themselves in a place where everybody is a clone, that's another cool thing about the uniforms. Following the costume design from Bram Stoker's Dracula, Heinfroth's guards wear cages, box-like cages over their heads. The bars of the cages don't completely obscure one's face, but if one keeps one's head tilted down ever so slightly, there's a chance that one can pass for one of the guards. Remind the PCs that this is a heist adventure and that they should not try to kill every living thing that they come across. Remind them again also that Dr. Heinfroth himself is a powerful vampire, a peerless foe in this domain, and someone that the PCs should avoid. Anyway, turn every single guard and every single character in Revel's End into a clone of Dr. Heinfroth. They all have the same face, even if they don't have the same statistics. Again, we can have hulking, brutish clones of Dr. Heinfroth, lithe, dexterous clones of Dr. Heinfroth, brainy, magic-using clones of Dr. Heinfroth. The statistics can vary, but the face remains the same. I would add that, instead of having names, all of Heinfroth's guards and staff have serial numbers. To make this replacement easy, just adopt the following method. Take the initials of any named NPC, and then add some numbers at the end. So the guard captain Eula Dargaria could become YD451. As for Heinfroth himself, give him the statistics of a vampire, yes, just a full vampire, and put him in the warden's place in area R21. Also, place a magical mirror in the warden's office, and let that be the means by which Heinfroth creates clones and duplicates of himself. If the PCs enter his office and he finds them out, you might have a dramatic scene where he reaches into the mirror and pulls out a few clones who then attack the PCs or chase them. Again though, this is a heist and you probably don't want that situation to happen. Instead, use it as a sort of backup case to avoid a TPK. Normally, Dr. Heinfroth would slaughter the PCs himself where they stand, but in this case he resorts to clones. Something like that. Finally, when it comes to Clone 13, describe him as a conspicuously tattooed version of Dr. Heinfroth. And of course, some of these tattoos are magical. All of Clone 13's stats and personality traits and motivations are roughly the same as Prisoner 13, and likewise Clone 13 can be found in Area R17. Assuming that the PCs manage to track down Clone 13, free him, and get him alone with Mort, then their mission is a success. You could just have Clone 13 open a portal to the Mists and have the PCs enter, or for fun, you could have Mort turn on them, saying, "Thanks for the magic clone, I'll enjoy using his power enslaving him after I deal with you." For fun, I would give him the statistics of a vampiric mind flayer. Just change his size to tiny, and say that instead of grappling with tentacles, Mort grapples using his spinal cord. Man, that would be a fun boss fight. And once that boss fight is through, if it's there at all that is, the PCs are free to leap into the portal, into the Mists, and on to their next adventure. So that's our short little one-shot adventure in Dominia. What did you think? This is another little one-shot adventure set amongst the Sea of Sorrows, and I'm going to be releasing videos soon about the other islands in the Sea of Sorrows. I hope to do these in some rapid-fire or rapid-ish fire succession, and also to set them up in a way where you could sort of string them together. The Blaustein one-shot adventure was for level 5 PCs, this one is for level 4 PCs. Let's see what else we can come up with. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Don't forget to do all the internet things, click like and subscribe, don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications about these new videos, and thanks!